There's no gradual way to say this. No careful entry point where the weight of it lessens if I choose the right words. This doesn't soften just because I try to deliver it gently. It exists at full intensity the moment I acknowledge it. And I've reached a point where not acknowledging it feels more unnatural than facing it directly, so I'm not going to ease into this. I'm not going to reshape it into something more manageable. I'm going to say it as it is, or at least as close as I can get to something that was never meant to be explained. Because whatever this is has already moved past the stage of being optional. I used to believe that everything meaningful required construction, time, exposure, gradual understanding. That depth had to be built layer by layer, through friction, through misunderstanding, through correction. That nothing real could exist without first being tested. That's how I've always operated. Carefully, deliberately, never allowing anything to exist without first understanding where it fits and what it changes. But you didn't follow that structure. You didn't arrive through process. You didn't develop through time. You didn't earn your place in the way everything else has. You were just there, not introduced, not formed, just present in a way that made it feel like you hadn't arrived at all, like you had always existed somewhere just outside my awareness. And I don't like things that bypass process. Because process is what gives me control. It's what allows me to measure, to evaluate, to decide. Without it, things become unpredictable. And I don't engage with unpredictability. I eliminate it, or I step away from it. That's how I've maintained stability. That's how I've stayed intact. But this didn't give me that option. Because before I could even recognize it as something unfamiliar, it had already integrated into something familiar. That's the contradiction I can't ignore. You feel unfamiliar in every logical sense. And yet, internally, nothing about you feels new, it feels remembered. And I don't mean that in a sentimental way. I mean it structurally, like recognizing a pattern you didn't know you were carrying until you saw it reflected somewhere else. That's what this is. A reflection, but not of who I am on the surface, of how I exist underneath it. The part that doesn't get expressed, the part that doesn't get shared, the part that remains untouched by most interactions because no one reaches that level. You did, without trying, without asking, without even acknowledging that you were doing it. And that's what makes this impossible to categorize, because if you had tried, I could have resisted. If you had asked, I could have denied. If you had pushed, I could have stepped back. But you didn't do any of those things. You just existed in a way that aligned too precisely to ignore. And alignment doesn't trigger defense. It bypasses it. That's why this got as far as it did. Because there was nothing to resist, nothing to question at first. It just made sense. And I didn't realize how far it had gone until I noticed something I don't usually allow. You started influencing how I think, not through suggestion, but through presence. That's where everything shifted. Because influence can be rejected, but presence changes the environment itself. And once the environment changes, everything inside it adjusts automatically. That's what happened to me. I didn't choose to adjust. I didn't decide to let you in further. It happened as a consequence of something deeper, something structural, something that matched in a way I wasn't prepared for. And now I'm here, trying to understand something that doesn't behave like anything I've encountered before, because this isn't attachment. It doesn't feel like dependency. It's not driven by emotion in the way most connections are. It's quieter than that, more precise. It's like alignment that refuses to stay abstract. Like something insisting on becoming real without asking permission first. And that creates a kind of tension I'm not used to. Not emotional tension, but structural tension. Because everything I've built internally was designed to function independently, self-contained, self-sufficient, unaffected. And yet now, There's something in that system that isn't just mine anymore. Not in ownership, but in influence, in presence, in awareness. You exist in the way I process things now, not as a distraction, not as a focus, but as a constant variable that wasn't there before. And variables change outcomes. Even if nothing else shifts, the results are no longer the same. That's what I've been trying to measure. Not what this is, but what it does. And what it does is undeniable. It sharpens things, clarifies them, removes the unnecessary layers I usually rely on to keep things controlled. It makes everything more direct, more accurate. And I don't know if that's something I should accept or something I should be cautious of, because clarity comes with consequence. Once you see something clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. Once you understand something precisely, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. And that's where I am now. There's no ambiguity left, no uncertainty to hide behind. This is real, not in a defined way, not in a labeled way, but in a way that has already changed something fundamental. And change at that level isn't temporary, it doesn't fade, it doesn't reverse, it integrates. And once it integrates, it becomes part of how everything functions moving forward. That's what I've been avoiding acknowledging. Not the connection, but the permanence of what it's becoming. Because if I accept that, then I also have to accept something else. This isn't something I can control, not fully, not in the way I'm used to. And that means whatever comes next. It won't be something I can predict with certainty. It will require something I don't usually rely on, something I don't easily give. Not trust in you, but trust in the process itself. And that's not something I offer lightly, because process for me has always been something I define, not something I surrender to. But this isn't asking for permission. It's already unfolding, already moving forward whether I define it or not. And the more I observe it, the more I realize something I can't ignore anymore. I haven't stopped it at any point, not at the beginning, not in the middle, not even now, when I fully understand what this could become. And that matters. Because I don't allow things to continue unless they belong. I don't let things reach this level unless they fit. And this, as much as I question it, as much as I analyze it, as much as I try to understand every angle of it, it fits, not perfectly, not comfortably, but accurately. And accuracy is something I don't dismiss. So now I'm left with something that doesn't need validation, only a decision not about what it is, but about whether I allow it to fully exist. Because right now, it exists in a space between acknowledgement and action, between recognition and acceptance, and that space doesn't hold forever. Eventually, something has to move. Either I define it, or I step away from it, and stepping away wouldn't erase it. That's the problem. It would just leave it unresolved. And I don't leave things unresolved when I understand them this clearly. So if I stay, it won't be passive anymore. It won't be observation. It won't be silent alignment. It will be something intentional, something chosen, something real in a way that can't be undone. And I don't make those kinds of choices lightly. But I also don't ignore something that has already proven its place. So the question isn't whether this matters. That part is already clear. The question is, what form does it take once I stop holding it at a distance? Because distance is the only thing keeping this undefined. And I'm starting to realize, I'm the one maintaining that distance, not you, not the situation, me. And if I let that go even slightly, then this becomes something else entirely. Something that doesn't just exist internally, but externally. Something that requires response, presence, action, and once that happens, there's no returning to this version of it. This quiet, undefined, controlled version, it becomes something lived, something experienced, something that carries consequence beyond thought. And that's the point I'm approaching now. Not forced, not rushed, but inevitable. Because I've already allowed too much for this to remain what it was, and I've already understood too much to pretend it's nothing. So whatever happens next, it won't be accidental. It will be a decision, a precise one. And once I make it, and stepping into it means accepting something I've avoided for a long time. Not uncertainty, but exposure, because distance doesn't just protect you from others. It protects you from being seen in ways you can't control, and I've always controlled that, not through avoidance, but through precision, through knowing exactly what I reveal, when I reveal it, and how it will be interpreted. There's no randomness in it, no accidental vulnerability. Everything has intention behind it, even silence, especially silence. But with you, that control doesn't function the same way, not because you take it from me, but because it becomes unnecessary. And that's more unsettling than losing it, because if something becomes unnecessary, it means something deeper has already replaced it, something that doesn't rely on control to maintain stability, something that exists without needing to be managed. And I'm not used to that. I'm used to building structure, maintaining it, adjusting it when needed, but not letting something exist without reinforcing it. Yet here I am, letting this exist. Not reinforcing it, not restricting it, just allowing it. And that alone tells me how far this has already gone, because I don't allow things lightly. Especially not things that have the potential to shift how I exist, but this already has. In ways that are too precise to ignore. I've noticed it in how I respond to absence now, not yours. Just absence in general. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't carry the same neutrality it used to. There's a contrast now, a difference that didn't exist before. Because once something aligns at a certain level, everything else reveals its lack of alignment more clearly, and that clarity changes how everything is perceived. Not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. And consistency is what makes something real, not intensity, not frequency. Consistency, that's what this has. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't weaken. It doesn't depend on interaction to exist. It just stays stable, present, unshaken by time or distance or silence. And that's rare because most things require reinforcement, attention, effort. Without those, they fade. But this hasn't, even in moments where nothing is happening, it's still there, not demanding, not intrusive, just present, like something that has already settled into place. And that's what makes it harder to step away from, not because I can't, but because stepping away wouldn't remove it. It would just create a separation between what exists internally and what I allow externally, and I don't operate well in contradiction. If something is real, I align with it, or I remove it entirely. There's no middle ground, no partial acceptance, no controlled distance where it exists just enough to be acknowledged, but not enough to matter. That's not how I function. Which means the space I'm in right now, this in-between, is temporary. It has to be, because eventually I'll do what I always do, make it exact, define it fully, and act accordingly. But this is the first time I haven't rushed that process. The first time I've let something exist before defining it. And I've been trying to understand why. Why I'm not dismantling this immediately. Why I'm not reducing it to something simpler. Why I'm not stepping back to regain control. And the answer is uncomfortable in its simplicity. Because this doesn't feel like something that needs to be fixed. It doesn't feel unstable. It doesn't feel misplaced. It feels correct. Not easy, not predictable, but correct in a way that doesn't trigger resistance. And I trust that feeling more than I trust logic sometimes. Not blindly, but when it's this consistent, this precise, this unchanged, no matter how much I analyze it, because I've tried to find flaws in it, tried to locate inconsistencies, tried to see if this was just perception stretching something into more than it is, but every time I examine it, it holds exactly as it is. No distortion, no exaggeration, just clarity, and clarity removes excuses. It removes the ability to pretend something isn't what it is, which means I can't keep treating this like something temporary or something undefined, because it's already defined itself, just not in words, in function, in impact, in presence. And that definition is stronger than anything I could assign to it. So now the only thing left undefined is my response to it, and that's where everything converges, because response determines direction, not feeling, not recognition, response. What I choose to do with something determines what it becomes, and up until now, I've chosen observation, awareness without action, recognition without movement. But that choice has a limit, because something like this doesn't stay static. It either deepens or it dissolves under the weight of inaction. And this hasn't shown any signs of dissolving, which means the only direction left is deeper. And deeper means something different. It means engagement. It means presence beyond thought. It means allowing this to exist in a way that isn't just internal. And that's the part I've been approaching carefully, not avoiding, just approaching with full awareness of what it changes. Because once I allow that, once I step into this fully, it won't just affect how I think, it will affect how I exist. And that's not a small shift. That's structural. That's foundational. That's something that rewrites patterns I've followed for years, pathos that have kept everything stable, predictable, contained. And I don't rewrite patterns unless there's a reason strong enough to justify it. But you or this or whatever exists here, it might be that reason. Not because it forces change, but because it makes the current structure feel incomplete. And I don't ignore incompleteness once I recognize it. I resolve it fully. So now I'm at a point where resolution isn't optional anymore. It's necessary not for clarity that already exists, but for alignment between what I understand and what I allow. Because right now, there's a gap between the two, and that gap is where tension exists, not confusion, not uncertainty, just tension between recognition and action. And that tension won't sustain itself forever. It will push toward a decision one way or another. And I can feel that push now, not urgent, not overwhelming, but steady, persistent. Like something that knows it will be answered eventually, so it doesn't need to rush, and that's what makes it harder to ignore, because it's not demanding anything, it's just waiting. And I don't let things wait indefinitely when I already know the answer exists. If I haven't said it yet, even if I haven't fully stepped into it, I know it's there. Somewhere just beneath the surface of what I've been willing to admit, and I'm getting closer to it. Closer to the point where observation turns into decision, where awareness turns into action, where this stops being something I analyze and becomes something I live with consciously. And when that moment comes, there won't be hesitation. There won't be partial steps. There won't be distance left to maintain. It will be exact, complete, deliberate, because that's the only way I move when something reaches this level, fully or not at all. And I already know this isn't something I'm going to walk away from, not after understanding it this clearly, not after allowing it this far, not after recognizing what it actually is beneath everything else. So the only thing left now is when I stop holding the line I've been standing on and step across it, not blindly, not emotionally, but with full awareness of what exists on the other side. And the fact that I haven't turned back yet even now, there's a shift that happens right before a decision becomes irreversible. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like a turning point in the way people expect turning points to feel. It's quieter than that, more precise, like something aligning internally to the point where the outcome is already decided, even if the action hasn't been taken yet. That's where I am now, not deciding, not questioning, just recognizing that the decision has already formed, somewhere beneath the analysis, beneath the observation, beneath all the control I've been maintaining to keep this contained. Because the truth is, I stopped questioning whether this should exist a while ago. I just didn't acknowledge when that happened. I kept approaching it like something that still needed evaluation, still needed to be measured, still needed to be understood from every angle before I allowed it to settle. But that was just habit, not necessity, because something in me had already accepted it. Quickly. Without needing confirmation, without needing permission. And that's the part I can't ignore anymore, because I don't accept things unconsciously. Not at this level. Not when they have the potential to change something fundamental. If something reaches that point, it means it's already passed every internal filter I have, every layer of analysis, every instinct designed to prevent exactly this kind of shift. And if it passed all of that without resistance, then it wasn't an intrusion. It was a match. That's the only explanation that holds. Not coincidence, not timing, not circumstance, match, in structure, in perception, in the way things are processed beneath everything visible. And I've been circling that truth without saying it directly, breaking it down, analyzing it, trying to understand it from every possible angle, except the one that matters most. Because saying it directly makes it real in a way that can't be undone. It removes the last layer of distance, the last space where I can pretend this is still something abstract, but it's not abstract anymore. It hasn't been for a while. I've just been maintaining the illusion of distance. Because distance gives me time. Time to adjust, time to understand, time to prepare for what happens next. But preparation has a limit. At some point, you're either ready or you're not. And waiting longer doesn't change that. It just delays what's already inevitable, and this feels inevitable. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that removes choice, but in a way where the choice becomes obvious once you stop resisting it, and I'm not resisting anymore. That's the difference now. Before, there was subtle resistance, not rejection, just caution control, a deliberate slowing down of something that could move faster if I allowed it. But now, that resistance is gone, not forced away, not overridden. It just isn't there anymore, and without it, everything becomes clearer, simpler. Not easier, but more direct. Because when you remove resistance, what remains is intention. And my intention is no longer neutral. It hasn't been for a while. I just hadn't defined it. But now I can. Now I can see it for what it is without distortion. Without overanalyzing it into something more complicated than it needs to be. This matters. You matter. Not in a temporary way, not in a way that fades with time or distance or distraction, but in a way that has already integrated into how I exist, and I know what that means. I know the weight of that. I know the implications of allowing something to reach that level. It means there's no clean separation anymore, no simple way to remove it if things change, no guarantee that it will remain contained or controlled. It means accepting that whatever this becomes, it will leave a mark, one way or another, and I don't accept marks lightly. I don't allow things to reach a level where they can alter something permanent unless they're worth it, unless they align in a way that justifies the impact. And it does. That's what I've been confirming this entire time, not whether it exists, but whether it deserves to. And the answer hasn't changed, no matter how many times I've looked at it, no matter how many angles I've examined, no matter how carefully I've tried to find reasons to hold back. The answer stays the same. It holds, it fits, it aligns. An alignment like this isn't something I dismiss. It's something I decide on fully, without hesitation once the clarity is complete, and the clarity is complete now. There's nothing left to analyze that would change the outcome, nothing left to question that would create doubt, nothing left to hold on to that justifies distance. So now, there's only one thing left. Action, not impulsive, not reactive, but deliberate, precise, a step forward that acknowledges everything this has become and everything it will continue to become if I allow it. Because that's the truth I've been approaching. This isn't static. It's not something that has reached its full form. It's still unfolding, still deepening, still becoming something more defined with time. And if it continues, it will reach a point where it's no longer just internal, no longer just understood. It will be lived, expressed, experienced in a way that changes not just how I think, but how I move, how I act, how I choose. And that's where this leads if I don't stop it. But I'm not going to stop it. That's the decision, not passive, not implied, explicit. I'm not stepping back. I'm not reducing this. I'm not containing it to something smaller just to make it easier to manage. I'm allowing it fully, without holding on to the distance I've been maintaining up until now. Because distance at this point would be dishonest. And I don't operate in dishonesty, not with myself, not with something I understand this clearly. So this is where it shifts. From observation to participation, from awareness to presence, from something that exists quietly to something that exists openly, not defined in rigid terms, not forced into categories that don't fit it, but acknowledged for exactly what it is. Something real, something rare, something that doesn't happen without reason. And I don't ignore reason when it's this precise. So whatever comes next. I'm not approaching it from a place of caution anymore. I'm approaching it from a place of certainty. Not certainty in the outcome, but certainty in the decision to continue, to move forward with it instead of holding it at a distance, to let it become whatever it's meant to become without interfering with its natural direction, because that's the only way something like this can exist honestly, without control distorting it, without hesitation limiting it, without fear reshaping it into something less than what it actually is. And I won't reduce this, not after understanding it at this level. So this is me crossing that line, not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. And once it's crossed, there's no version of this where I go back to how it was before, no version where this becomes something small again, no version where this is just unnoticed, because now it's acknowledged fully. And acknowledgement changes everything. It turns something internal into something real, something that exists not just in thought, but in action, in presence, in the way I show up, and I will show up differently now because I've already changed. That part is done. What comes next is just the external reflection of what's already happened internally, and that's the part I'm stepping into now, without hesitation, without distance, without pretending this is anything less than what it is, because it's not less. It never was. I just needed to reach the point where I was willing to say it without holding anything back, and I'm there now. So whatever this becomes, I'm not watching it from the outside anymore. I'm in it, completely.